Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and I will put on my little name thing. And we're here with Ed Jacobson, Dr. Ed Jacobson, actually. And he's our guest today for our Facebook Live presentation, as well as the recording that we're going to be doing for our podcast episode. And the way this works is Ed and I will do the podcast first. We'll continue on for a while after the podcast is over on Facebook Live. And when we come back to Facebook Live, if there's any questions, we will be glad to answer them at that point. So I'm going to start the podcast recording and we'll be back in about 23 minutes, but you'll still be watching as we go ahead. So here we go. Hey, this is Josh Patrick, and you're at the Sustainable Business Podcast. Today, my guest is Edward Jacobson. Ed is a really interesting guy. I've gotten to know Ed over the last, 4 or 5 years at several sudden money programs I've been at with him. And he is a PhD psychologist. He has an MBA. He has consulted with Fortune 50 companies as well as smaller financial services firms. And I can tell you, Ed is one of the most interesting people we're ever going to have a conversation with. And today we're going to be talking about the wonderful world of positive psychology and appreciative inquiry. Ed is really an expert at that. And instead of listening to me just wander on about it, let's bring Ed in. Hey, Ed, how are you today?
I am well. And you, I presume, are fine.
I presume I'm fine also. Thanks for asking.
Okay.
So, Ed, is there a difference between positive psychology and appreciative inquiry, first of all?
Yes, and if this is the Venn diagram, there's tremendous overlap between the two. So positive psychology, it's actually about 20 years old, 19 years old. It's one of those strange things where Marty Seligman, who's acknowledged as the founder, actually declared positive psychology open for business. It was a landmark thing that he did, and it's been a big seller since then. A lot of research, a number of master's degree programs for positive psychology practitioners, and the emphasis of practicing, and it's very much research based. And there's kind of a quick translation from research to application because that's the big imperative, and it's based on what makes for positive and effective and high well-being people, relationships like marriages, and organizations, and even communities. Appreciative inquiry started as an organizational development process in Cleveland at Case Western Reserve, and it's turned the consulting world on its head, from looking at what's wrong in the organization and how do we fix it, to something quite diametrically opposite, which is what's good here and how do we get more of it. And that's about the starkest contrast I can make.
So if it's turned the consulting world on its head, why aren't we hearing more about appreciative inquiry?
Why are we not? Is that what your question is?
I do read about it and I see it, but it's not like I wouldn't consider it mainstream, more as it's like emerging mainstream, maybe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it's that, and maybe a little smaller. Maybe I think it's from my perspective and the people I talk with. There's been a tremendous expansion, and much of it is in education, in organizational work, and in coaching, and even psychotherapy, as well as organizational consulting. And so I think it takes a long time, and I'm sure you know this and agree, for an innovation to seep through and diffuse into the culture. And a lot of people and a lot of organizations are still steeped in what's wrong here and how do we fix it? How do we fix him or her? How do we get rid of them? So it's spreading like a positive
I would absolutely
disease.
agree. It takes a long time for something to seep into the
Yeah.
modern world.
Yeah.
So my question is, I have lots of questions, obviously, but one of my questions might be, if we study behavioral economics,
Mm-hmm.
which I know that you're very aware of, one of the things that we learn is that there's a big loss aversion
Mhm.
situation that human beings sort of do. We move away from pain, which means we want to not have mistakes happen or correct mistakes. But it appears to me that appreciative inquiry actually says, well, maybe that's not the best way to look at things. So, how do
Mhm.
we balance those two things off?
Well, balance is the key, and it's really a question of how do we shift the balance from focusing exclusively on what's wrong, who's wrong, what did we do, how did that person screw up, to what are the strengths in the organization, how can we appreciate those strengths and build on them, uh, what are we doing right, what are we really aspiring for, and are we aspiring for something, is our vision of our business and even of our lives, is it compelling, is it positive, is it a sucking motion drawing us to the desired future. And so it's not a question of you should never focus on on negatives. That would be just totally crazy. And some research shows that when the emphasis is so much on positives, like a 10-to-1 ratio, that's an organization or relationship in which denial is taking place. We're all Mary Poppins. And so it's just really important to make what's sometimes for some people a wrenching discovery that there's positive stuff going on. And for many of us, it's like, wow, the focus on negatives has actually been taught to us, and the positive instincts that we have been sort of trained out of us. Take physicians, for example. Uh, they're taught to find a hole and fix it, find a problem and then solve it, as opposed to looking to the whole person and what they are about.
That makes perfectly good sense. So, when somebody focuses on the positive,
Mm-hmm.
which I think makes a ton of sense, you can make your positive better and often world class.
Mm-hmm.
And I do agree that you have to pay attention to the negatives of things that don't work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my statements always is I want to magnify the positive and I want to manage the negative. Or I want to magnify my strengths and I want to manage my weaknesses. I'm not especially interested in making my weaknesses into a strength because I'm not sure it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's probably right. Is there a question in there?
Well, the question I have is, doesn't that make sense, or is that a good way to go about thinking about um, what is that an appropriate way to deal with positives and negatives in your life?
I think so. And by your life, I think we're talking about not just our work life, but our relationships, including our family, and honestly, our relationships with ourselves. Because if we don't have that kind of affirmative, grounded sense of ourselves and value what our aspirations are and what our skills are and achievements, then the world then knows that because we're faking it. So your notion of build on the strengths and manage the weaknesses or limitations is exactly right. And there's a risk factor in here. So I like to say, build on the strengths and focus on the negatives only to the extent that you must in order for the strengths to blossom and the organization to perform. It's just an alternative version of focus on strengths and manage the negatives.
So, could you give me an example of how that might work?
Sure. Um, there's a lot of examples that are positive, pardon me, that are powerful. And as an example, uh, I'll take the Cleveland Clinic case. It's a classic case in appreciative inquiry in organizations. And I think everybody knows the Cleveland Clinic is world class, but their hotel was not for guests and visiting people. It was a dump. It was like one step out of, it was in chapter 10 and a half, basically. And so they didn't do an organizational study. Let's find out what's wrong. Let's fix it. They did something unique. They arranged for the Cleveland Clinic personnel, the staff, pretty much everybody, not the clinic, but the hotel, to visit world-class um, Baldrige Award type winners for customer service, and one of the great hotel chains. And their job was to shadow people for a week and compare notes as they were going along with what they were seeing, focusing on what's right. And that everybody came back, dozens and dozens of people came back super excited. They had put aside their woe is us mentality because they were inspired as to what was possible. And then over time, it became a five-star clinic, a five-star hotel, not by getting rid of people, but by getting rid of practices, turning practices that were not working and that were harmful on their head. So that's an example where simply conversation changes the nature of how we think about things, changes our mindset, and begins to change the group mindset.
So what you said, I just found really interesting because it fits in with one of my tenets around systems, which is don't blame the person, blame the system.
Mm-hmm.
And how important is appreciative inquiry as part of a systematic um, development or strategy for business?
It can, when it's done right, it can be very pervasive in shifting the culture, not necessarily shifting how profitable we want to be, but shifting pretty much everything, conversations and relationships that were avoidant, hostile, damaging, and were below the line in terms of the results of a group or an entire company, can get shifted to the positive. And it doesn't take a huge intervention to do that necessarily. As Joel and Peter from TwinCraft talked with you on a previous episode, you can start small. And I like to say to owners and CEOs and the like, start with yourself. Make sure that your mindset, make sure that your mindset is more towards the positive, seeing possibilities rather than negatives, only negatives, seeing opportunity, seeing if you like, seeing goodness in people, positives in people, instead of how can we limit the damage that they do. And you could be like Jack Welch, at the former CEO and chairman at GE. Go talk to the guys on the dock and the people in the, talk to the secretaries and shipping people and find out what's really going on and what would really work for them. They'll tell you the truth.
They will. I have found that blue collar folks, the people actually doing the work, are way more honest about what's going on in the company than management ever is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think they believe they just have a lot less to lose at, oh, if the boss fires me, I'll go find another job. So they're going to tell you the truth often, which is a good place to go. So, Ed, adopting these sort of, positive practices and beliefs is really for many executives or business owners, a 180-degree switch on how they view the world. And one of the things that, one of the stupid sayings in the world, which has some truth, it's really hard to teach old dogs new tricks, i.e. a business owner who's over 50 years old.
Hopeless? No.
Well, I wouldn't say hopeless. I would just say, well, if somebody is 50 years old and they say, gee, this appreciative inquiry sounds kind of interesting, but don't know if it's going to work. What would you tell them to do first and second and third?
Well, I probably give them something to read, or I would explain it to them and how it's changed my own life, how it's changed my clients' work lives and personal lives who adapt this and adopt it. And I would also give him some examples of flinty business owners. I'm sorry for that. Flinty business owners who actually have gotten the AI message, if you like, smelled the fumes, the fragrances, shall I say, and basically So your 50-year-old business owner who's owned his business for 27 years or whatever amount, he can identify with the success instances. And you can even have him or her have them speak to Joel and Peter at Twincraft Skincare, because he'll begin to, fancy word, desensitize to the idea of actually focusing on a positive. And
Cool. So, what would the first action they would take? I mean, what could they do as an initial action to move towards thinking in a different way?
yeah, yeah. Well, as they start to feel, let's say if you or I are coaching them or working with them, or another business owner who's agreeing to be their mentor on this, that owner starts to get the rhythms of this. He or she might decide, let me, there's several vital people who I think are going to really be interested in this, and let's have a lunch and learn. Let's have a, fancy word, study group, but an interest group of anybody who wants to learn a little bit about this. And then there's probably people locally in their community who are practitioners who would be very happy to do a lunch and learn or a demo or what have you, for goodwill and for the prospect of getting work, of course. But I think it's possible to start small in that way and also practice it. There's a word for practicing it without calling it appreciative inquiry or without bringing in a consultant to transform your culture. Thank you very much. And it's called doing stealth AI. Don't announce, I'm now going to be appreciative to the group, but when somebody does something that's really great or even just in line with what you're hoping and expecting them to do, give them positive feedback, not just great job or attaboy or atta gal, but I really liked it when you did this and that, when you answered the customer's questions in a forthright manner, but you deferred to me when it was appropriate to do so, so I could come in with the definitive authoritative word. That was really working the group, working the meeting in an effective way. Thank you.
So, would it make sense that you're doing that? You're doing some stealth AI,
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying, "Gee, I specifically really liked the way you handled that customer complaint."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Would it make any sense for you to say, now, out of curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
if there was anything that you could have done differently to make it even better,
Mm.
what would that be? Is that an appropriate follow-up question? Or do you just want to stop at appreciating what they've done?
The short answer is the latter. I remember when I was a nerdy kid in grade school and elementary school and all of that. So I brought home a report card that had a 97. And my father very jokingly said, "Where's the other 3 points?" And we laughed about it, but that's kind of an example of what you're saying. And it's, you want to fan the flames. You want to fan the flames of the positive.
It's really not what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
That may be the way it came across, but my question is, okay, great. I appreciate what you've done,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to build world class. And what we did was really good,
Mm-hmm.
but is it really? How would I get ideas how to make it better? I guess that's the question I'm asking.
Okay. So what I would do is either with that person or get a group of 8 customer service reps or people
Yes.
doing a certain function and
Right.
ask them to share with each other stories of a time when their customer was crazy delighted with
Yeah.
the service, and compare notes. It's a little bit like the Cleveland Clinic Hospital case. Compare notes, extract what the factors are that are instrumental in creating the customer experience that's positive, basically reversing an angry customer to an advocate, because the same energy reversed is still strong, and then creating actions, structures around that kind of thing.
So what I'm hearing you say is that appreciative inquiry starts off with appreciating the individual, but then bringing a group of like job people together to work as a group on telling stories about things that worked,
Mm-hmm.
lessons we can learn, and then ways to memorialize them so we do them over and over and over again.
Exactly. And you don't have to start with one, but if the owner, let's say, just samples around various CSRs or other kinds of people and
Right.
starts to get a feeling for the rhythms of that, then put them on your task force or group, interest group or whatever. Bring in 3 or 4 others, and then you're rolling. You've overcome inertia and you're starting to make positive movement forward. And there's a kind of a maxim in appreciative inquiry, which is that things start to change as soon as you ask the first question. So why not make the question powerful and positive? Tell me a story of a time when you were at the peak of your work and people were loving what you were doing. You were getting positive results and kudos from everybody, and you felt on top of the world. What was happening? What did you do? What support did you have? And what lessons did you learn for us to benefit from?
That's great. So, Ed, we have time for one more question on the podcast today,
Sure.
and this is going to be a biggie because it is a bugaboo in so many businesses.
Okay.
Ready?
I'll set myself here. Okay.
Okay. Where
Breathe.
do mistakes fit into appreciative inquiry?
Um, that's a great question, and I think they have a place. You don't lead with them, basically. But by the same token, if you're the task force or commission that's looking to find out why the Challenger spacecraft died, blew up, exploded, you don't start with what's the best thing that happened to you this week. You want people who are focused on how on getting to what's going on and how do we turn it around. But you enter with a mindset of, okay, we can't have that happen. It's especially urgent. And you can either look at negative instances of that mistake, or you can start with looking at when it goes well, what has to happen for it to go well? And then let's compare the two as to how do mistakes get made and how do we get the optimal functioning, the optimal systems. But obviously you have to do a stop action if the firm or the business is hemorrhaging cash or losing customers. You probably need to do something to staunch the flow of blood.
Cool. So, Ed, we are unfortunately out of time for the podcast part of this, but we're going to continue on
Oh,
with
great.
5 afterwards. So, before we end the podcast, how could people find you if they were interested in having a conversation or learn more about what you do and how it works with appreciative inquiry?
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, my email address, I don't know if you have it here, but it's Ed Jacobson, and it's SON and the number 1 at sbcglobal.net. And let me give my cell phone, which is my business phone, essentially.
Sure.
608-345-3332. And leave a message or let's chat.
Cool. So, well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today.
Loved it.
And I also have an offer for you. I have a 1-hour free audio CD. And for you poor people who have bought new cars and don't have CD players, you're
Oh,
probably going to have to send me an email asking for the audio file because you're going to tell me I have no way of listening to the CDs. I don't own one or a CD player.
yeah.
And to get the CD is actually pretty easy. You just take out your smartphone. And if you're driving, which many of you are, please wait till you stop driving. And you text the word sustainable to 44222. That's the word sustainable to 44222. You're going to get a link. You give me your name and your address, and we mail you the physical CD. And if you happen to be one of those poor souls that doesn't have a CD player, And then you can just email me at jpatrick@askjoshpatrick.com. That's jpatrick@askjoshpatrick.com, and say you were listening to the podcast with Ed Jacobson and you would like to get the sustainability audio file so you can take a listen to it. And this is Josh Patrick. You're at the Sustainable Business. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today, and I hope to see you back here really soon. Okay, Ed, I'm going to continue on with mistakes because I think that I'm on an interesting little jag here.
Mm.
And I actually have several types of mistakes, and mistakes are my signature thing of learning how to manage, because I think that too many business owners really badly deal with mistakes.
Mm.
And there's actually a bunch of different types of mistakes. I mean, you were talking about the mistake that's a bad mistake. But in appreciative inquiry, I have found that I come up with what I call magnificent mistakes.
I love it.
And a magnificent mistake is something that happens by happenstance that would never had happened if I was working in a narrow, goal-based environment instead of working in an expansive, appreciative environment. Let me give an example of how this worked in my life, at least one example. We used to have a real challenge. I used to be in the vending and food service business, and our vending route drivers would go out and they would learn how to fill routes, and they'd go with a trainer and they'd be out there for 6 or 7 weeks learning how to do this. And the first day they went by themselves, they'd work 14, 16, 18 hours to get the work done.
Wow.
And we were losing 50% of the people we hired. Because nobody wants to work 18 hours a day. I get that.
Yeah.
So one day we happened to have a vending bank that was built in our warehouse, ready to go out in the location, but wasn't going to go for 3 weeks. So somebody, I think it was me, but I'm not really sure even who came up with the idea, said, let's train the route driver in-house on these machines and then send them out. So we spent 2 weeks training the person how to fill and order and clean vending machines, just doing that. That's all the trainer did. We had a route jumper actually fill in for the route. Long story short, the route driver went out. Instead of spending 16 or 18 hours, he was back in 12 hours. And the next day he was back in 11 hours. The next day he was back in 10 hours, which is what they were expected to work anyhow. And he ended up, and we started doing this, and instead of losing 50% of our route drivers, we basically lost none of them.
Wow. And
that was truly a mistake. I mean, it wasn't anything planned. We didn't say, let's try this and figure it out. It was an experiment. And the truth is, most mistakes are actually experiments gone awry when you really think about it.
Okay.
And I think that when we think about mistakes, there's actually two types of mistakes that we want to be mindful of. One is mistakes which are life-ending or business-ending. And then there's learning mistakes. And the two are very different. And we need to understand it's okay for people to make learning mistakes. It's not okay for them to make life-ending mistakes. And we can keep them from doing that.
Yes.
Does that fit in with the whole world of appreciative inquiry and this sort of positive psychology?
Yes, because you're building in positive experiences, how to do it right. And it's a very efficient method. And so you're basically showing them in a controlled setting how to do it. You're aiming not to say, don't do that, but do it this way. And it's a safer environment than where they're with a trainer out on the truck and probably nervous about what they're doing, exhausted from working 18 hours a day before to correct their own mistakes, and defensive. That's not a recipe for good learning.
No, it's not. And what we found was the trainer was out there training the new driver for that 6 or 7 weeks, and you would think he'd be thoroughly trained at that point. What the trainer really was interested in doing was getting the route done, not training the new person. That was the learning we got afterwards. And I think that's a lesson for all sorts of businesses, is that as you're training new people, understand the motivation of what the trainer is doing at the time they're training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's all about learning as well as all the other stuff that goes on there. So if if somebody doesn't have a headset of looking on the bright side,
Mm-hmm.
is there any hope for them in positive psychology?
Sure. Ask them why they love their kids. Ask them to tell you what's great about their children, each of them, what they appreciate, what they love, what they wouldn't be the same person without that. And you're starting that journey. And then tell me about the best employee or the best working relationship you've ever had. And,
So, what if you're an employee in a company
mm-hmm.
and you have a boss who looks at the glass as half empty?
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a way for an employee to help their boss become more appreciative about the world and them as individuals?
That's tough, isn't it? I mean, your experience
Well,
is it's tough to turn
I
around.
think it's very tough, and I think that we don't have a lot of employees who listen to this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
but we have a lot of employers who do have employees, and at some point, we're even employees of all our clients. I have some clients
Yes, of
who
course.
are essentially, I call them the Debbie Downer clients,
Yeah.
and they happen to be men and not women, but it sort of fits in. What I call them Donald Downer, or Dick Downer, whatever. But anyway, a Downer clients, and they really don't like to see anything positive in the world. My father was like that. He used to say, "I'm from Missouri. Prove it to me."
Yes, that's right. The show me state.
Yeah, the show me state. So, if you have a client or you're an employee and your boss is really just a negative person,
Mm-hmm.
is it better to say goodbye, or is it better to try to help them become more positive? And if I wanted to help them become more positive, what would I do?
I'd probably get a few of my peers, work peers, who also know that David Downer is a downer, and uh, and simply pay attention to when the smallest sliver of positivity on his part, like that wasn't too bad. Pay attention to him. That's a reinforcer. But don't feed his negativity. Don't respond. Don't to the best of your ability, not to cringe, but feed the positive and give him some positives for what he does. And he'll probably be suspicious, but over time there may be an opening. And and if you go to an AI training or reading a book or video series or something like that, you might tell them, hey, I saw this thing. I've been thinking about this stuff, and it's so revolutionary to how we do business that I don't know if you're interested, but I could tell you about it sometime. And then
So,
don't do the Mary Poppins thing with all smiles. Make the business case for it, because if he wanted, if he thought that it was good, if he understood that it was good for business, then he might be interested in modifying his behavior, even if he didn't feel deeply appreciative internally. It would start to loosen up things. He would start to hold back his more savage comments, and the workplace might start to shift a bit. And I have to say that it works both ways, employer and employee. If you're working for a boss who is unremittingly negative and sour and destructive, and that's not going to change, either try to get transferred if it's a big enough organization, an HR function, or polish up your resume. And the other on the other side, to reverse it, if you've got an employee who is just so sour and critical, and especially if they've been there a long time, which every new boss inherits something when they take over a company, let's say.
Sure.
And if that person if their behavior can't be shaped, then get them the hell out of there, because they are poisoning the punch bowl. And what you're going to find, I've seen this dozens of times, and I'm positive you have as well, and our viewers as well. What you find is that everybody knew that Ethel or Jim was really not only gumming up the works, but was kind of a black cloud. They wanted to avoid him, but they were stuck with him, and they will open up and flower more. And you'll also, as owner or supervisor or boss, you'll find a lot of crap that they were covering up or doing their way, which was very dysfunctional. So it always happens. Honestly, nothing's 100%, except this feels like 100%. When somebody leaves who, quote unquote, owns the place, you'll just, I don't mean literally, of course, but who was there at the beginning and who has a stake in the ground and all of that, they may have been wonderful, but when they leave, you find out that they owned certain things in a way that was not efficient, not productive, that was actually sapping other people's productivity. So it always opens up.
Yeah,
so sometimes you got to pull the trigger.
Yeah. I call those people brilliant jerks. And in my experience, you cannot let the brilliant jerks stay in your company because they're going to destroy it.
Yes.
I always found it interesting. And there was always, I had 90 employees in my food service company. So there was always one brilliant jerk or so running around the company. And because we all like to think that we're nice bosses and we try to fix people, we spend 6 months, 9 months trying to get these brilliant jerks to behave like human beings. And after I would finally say, okay, this isn't going to work, we just have to have them leave the company, I'd have a whole line of people walking in my office saying, "Hey, Josh, what took you so long?"
I knew it.
My question always was, "What do you mean what took me so long? What took you so long? You didn't open your mouth until I took some action here. What I didn't think you had tape over it."
Yeah.
So do you have any, and we'll end here, but do you have any recommendations in that particular case to get employees to be more forthcoming when there's a fellow employee who is just causing all sorts of problems?
Well, first of all, you have to create a safe atmosphere so that it's a little bit like whistleblowing.
Sure.
It has to be safe to approach you or whoever is the person that needs to know about this, and preferably, come to the boss with this before you're about to resign. When it's difficult but not totally intolerable, because prevention or early intervention is more helpful. And I would it probably is a low trust environment, so that people were kind of tending to their own knitting and not sticking out the neck, because you know what happens when you stick out your neck. So you could have a conversation with everybody, or you can start with your management team. What's the trust level like here? And what's an example of where we're getting high trust in each other, or from employees or with employees? And how do we build that trust? What's the recipe? What are the ingredients of it? And I would contrast it with, let's look at a low trust relationship, and what are the inputs there? And let's see, how do we transform the negative into the positive? How do we build on the positive? And I'd consider bringing people together and talk about, have people tell stories about a time when they felt very trusting of either the executives or one other person in the company, and or ever anywhere. And what was that like? What made that person trustworthy? what happens when people put trust in you? How have you earned it? Because you don't earn it by your title. You earn it by your authenticity, being non-punitive, being for that person and for improving what's happening.
Cool. So, Ed, I think we're going to end it here. And you have given us tons of things to think about. And those who are still watching, I'm hoping you take the opportunity to speak with Ed because you'll get some great information. I know I have over the years. And thanks a lot for hanging out with us today. And I hope to see you back here really soon at the Sustainable Business.